Gracious and loving God, on this Spy Wednesday, may we not be betrayers of the faith. May we not be betrayers as followers of Christ. May we, in fact, be true to his way for the cause and for the love of and for the sake of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, this is Spy Wednesday in the old naming of things. Spy, one of the old meanings of that word was traitor. So there you go. There is yet another way to the death penalty. There is yet another way to eliminate others, one aimed not at countries, but at individuals. It is the death penalty. St. John Paul II stated clearly and firmly that the death penalty is inadequate from a moral standpoint and no longer necessary from that of penal justice. There can be no stepping back from this position. Today, we state clearly that the death penalty is inadmissible, and the Church is firmly committed to calling for its abolition worldwide. Anybody want to talk about that?
Timely, like Virginia.
In the New Testament, while individuals are asked not to take justice into their own hands, see Romans 12:17, there is also a recognition of the need for authorities to impose penalties on evildoers, Romans 13:4, 1 Peter 2:14. Indeed, civic life structured around an organized community needs rules of coexistence, the willful violation of which demands appropriate redress. This means that legitimate public authority can and must inflict punishments according to the seriousness of the crimes, and that judicial power be guaranteed a necessary independence in the realm of law. This sounds a little bit like Luther's idea of the two kingdoms.
Does that paragraph contradict the previous one, or am I not reading this right?
I don't think so. I think he's saying the law has its place and its purpose, but still that the death penalty itself is a non-negotiable.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, I think he's saying, yeah, you have to have penalties for when people do really evil things. You have to separate them from the rest of society, but killing them is going too far.
Okay.
From the earliest centuries of the Church, some were clearly opposed to capital punishment. Lactantius, for example, held that there ought to be no exception at all, that it is always unlawful to put a man to death. Pope Nicholas I urged that efforts be made to free from the punishment of death not only each of the innocent, but all the guilty as well. During the trial of murders of two priests, St. Augustine asked the judge not to take the life of the assassins with this argument: "We do not object to your depriving these wicked men of the freedom to commit further crimes. Our desire is rather that justice be satisfied without the taking of their lives or the maiming of their bodies in any part, and at the same time that by the coercive measures provided by the law, they be turned from their irrational fury to the calmness of men of sound mind, and from their evil deeds to some useful employment. This too is considered a condemnation, but who does not see that when savage violence is restrained and remedies meant to produce repentance are provided, it should be considered a benefit rather than a mere punitive measure. Do not let the atrocity of their sins feed a desire for vengeance, but desire instead to heal the wounds which those deeds have inflicted on their souls." Wow, that's pretty advanced thinking for that era. Again, any thoughts or comments? Fear and resentment can easily lead to viewing punishment as a vindictive and even cruel way, rather than as part of a process of healing and reintegration into society. Nowadays, in some political sectors and certain media, public and private violence and revenge are incited not only against those responsible for committing crimes, but also against those suspected, whether proven or not, of breaking the law. There is at times a tendency to deliberately fabricate enemies, stereotype figures who represent all the characteristics that society perceives or interprets as threatening. The mechanisms that form these images are the same that allowed the spread of racist ideas in their time. This has made all the more dangerous the growing practice in some countries of resorting to preventive custody, imprisonment without trial, and especially the death penalty. Anyone else would like to read?
I'll read. 267. Here I would stress that it is impossible to imagine that states today have no other means than capital punishment to protect the lives of other people from the unjust aggressor. Particularly serious in this regard are so-called extrajudicial or extra-legal executions, which are homicides deliberately committed by certain states and by their agents, often passed off as clashes with criminals or presented as the unintended consequences of reasonable, necessary, and proportionate use of force in applying the law. Ooh, never thought of it that way. The arguments against the death penalty are numerous and well known. The Church has rightly called attention to several of these, such as the possibility of judicial error and the use made of such punishment by totalitarian and dictatorial regimes as a means of suppressing political dissidents or persecuting religious and cultural minorities, all victims whom the legislature of those regimes consider delinquents. All Christians and people of goodwill are today called to work not only for the abolition of the death penalty, legal or illegal in all its forms, but also to work for the improvement of prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of the persons deprived of their freedom. I would link this to life imprisonment. A life sentence is a secret death penalty.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So he doesn't see life imprisonment as an alternative to the death penalty. He sees it as another form of the death penalty.
I would agree with that. I mean, with what you're saying, that's how he sees it. And since we have a major trial going on in this country right now, this is appropriate information.
My brother-in-law is an attorney, and one of the things that he said to me that was just astounding is that just about 100% of all people on death row have been in foster care in their lifetime.
Really?
In their lifetime. That one of the root problems of some of these individuals that have been convicted for such horrible crimes, but they almost all have spent time in foster care, which is pretty sad when you think about that.
Wow, that would make an interesting doctoral dissertation for somebody in school, in college, in university.
Yep.
Whoosh. Let us keep in mind that not even a murderer loses his personal dignity, and God himself pledges to guarantee this. The firm rejection of the death penalty shows to what extent it is possible to recognize the inalienable dignity of every human being and to accept that he or she has a place in this universe. If I do not deny that dignity to the worst of criminals, I will not deny it to anyone. I will give everyone the possibility of sharing this planet with me, despite all our differences. I ask Christians who remain hesitant on this point, and those tempted to yield to violence in any form, to keep in mind the words of the book of Isaiah, quote, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares for us. For us, this prophecy took flesh in Christ Jesus, who, seeing a disciple tempted to violence, said firmly, 'Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword.' These words echoed the ancient warning, 'I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed.' Jesus' reaction, which sprang from his heart, bridges the gap of the centuries and reaches the present as an enduring appeal."
So when the Pope was talking about, classifying the life imprisonment with the death penalty as being the same, I'm wondering what he, kind of what measure he would use, and if maybe rehabilitation isn't the goal here. And failing rehabilitation could result in a person living their life in prison. I just don't know.
I think we do have people living their life in prison. And what concerns me is the poor slob that's in jail for the rest of his life, in prison for the rest of his life, who gets 1 hour away from his own four walls with nothing to do. That would literally drive me up the wall if I didn't have something to read or to do. And I think that's almost cruel and inhuman.
Yeah.
Well, and part of the problem is that our entire prison system is punitive.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole structure of it is punitive. There's nothing or very little about it that's geared toward rehabilitation or restructuring the person, addressing anything interior in them. There have been some efforts at that, and some prisons, some states are better than others. Some prisons are better than others. Some have some education systems in them where prisoners can pursue degrees and things like that while they're in prison, but there's not much in the way of counseling. And it depends on the prison, and it depends on the state, it depends on the county. Those things are just so variable from place to place. But there's just no kind of overall philosophy that goes beyond punishing. And not like in some other countries where there is a genuine effort to try to reform the person and reshape the person. I suspect if Francis was put in charge of things like that, being that he's a Franciscan, he would start to do what he could to change the interior person. There's a concept in Franciscanism, and we just started learning about it a week before last, and I'm still kind of trying to fully understand it. It's called mirroring. And one of the first things is that you greet people with an open face, because you want to reflect back to them their best selves. And you want them to see your best self when they meet you, so that they reflect that back to you. Mirroring begins with the newborn. That's like the mother's face. If the mother expresses joy and delight, that the baby learns to reflect that. And if the mother can consistently express that when she sees the baby, joy and delight and happiness, and let the baby know, this is what you bring to me, this is what you bring to the world, It just from the very beginning of the baby plants that in the baby. I bring joy and delight to the world. The secondary phase of that is the mirroring of the father, because the baby's primary connection is with the mother. But then if the father can also do that, it reinforces. And it's the secondary step in making that baby, helping that baby become a whole and healthy person right from the very, very beginning, when the father can provide that mirroring that says, you are a joy and a delight. You know, it's the, when I first started hearing about this, it just brought tears to my eyes, because it's like,
Yeah.
of course, it makes so much sense. The baby gets that planted in them from the very beginning, but then you start to think about all the kids who don't get that, whose parents
In
don't
line with
provide.
what Karen was saying.
And you know, it's like, no wonder so many people are screwed up. But then people are hungry for that internally, and they go out searching for it in the rest of their lives and in the rest of their work, and they don't know how to get it. They need to. We all need to hear that we are beloved. We all need to hear that there's something in us that's good and brings good to the world. And if we don't hear that, if we don't know that, we try to force our way into the world some way or another. I mean, it's kind of rudimentary, but it, you know, when you start hearing these concepts, you go, oh, well, this makes sense. This makes just a whole lot of sense from a spiritual level, from a psychological level. And what's our solution as a society? Well, this one's broken. Let's put them away. Instead of what can we do to fix this?
Our first granddaughter, Nicole, was at our house for the first 2 weeks after she was born. And I said to Phil, I said, something's not right. Something's not right. And sure enough, Nicole was legally blind. She's albino, we found out later. And as a result, she had some significant eyesight issues. And so in talking with her and looking at her, and I had kids, and her response and her connection wasn't there. And it did have an effect on her when she was very small, because she didn't make eye contact. She didn't smile back because she couldn't see somebody smiling at her. So we had to do other things, which we learned. But, you know, I wonder now about all these darling little chickaboos we see in the market with our masks on, and how we used to interact with them all the time. And now, you know, you hope they can see your smile through your eyes when you look at them. But it's so different now with kids.
Yeah.
I wonder what effect it's going to have down the road with these little kids that have only seen people with masks on.
So, Pastor, is this what you mean by mirroring?
Well,
I think you got the essence of it, Bob.
Oh, my word.
And to be fair, I have to tell you, the pastor is the one that posted that.
I know.
well, you notice that baby's not crying.
And Dad's still watching the ball game.
Oh.
Okay.
And I can't resist mentioning that, Pastor, when you talk about rehabilitation and for prisoners, is the observation that, well, in California, we pay them unemployment compensation.
Oh, gosh. I may have to move. This is ridiculous.
Wait, prisoners? Is that what you're saying? Prisoners receive unemployment compensation?
There's a huge furor going on in that the head of unemployment, who is now moved into Biden's administration, actually during her administration was paying, I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars of unemployment to prisoners.
How did she get away
How?
with that?
And anyway,
Well,
that's
I mean,
your
how do you
California
do
tax
that?
dollar at work, I'm afraid.
Well,
They don't have account checking. I mean, I don't understand how that could work. You know,
I
it
don't-
doesn't do any good to give them a debit card or a check to cash. How would they receive it and where and how would they use it?
I don't think there's a problem with spending money in prison.
no.
Buy cigarettes. I mean, I don't get that.
Ugh.
Anyway, I hadn't heard that before. That's interesting.
Okay, I'm going to switch this to a more pleasant note. There's a commercial on TV that pastor's comments on mirroring made me think of. Yeah, I think it's a Pampers commercial where the baby is laid on the mother's chest and it's looking up at the sound of the voice. That is just adorable. Just adorable. It's a brand newborn. Ugh, okay, where am I? 270?
71.
71.
71?
Yeah.
I didn't think I read 70. Oh, yeah, I did. Okay. This is on religions at the service of fraternity in our world. The different religions, based on their respect for each human person as a creature called to be a child of God, contribute significantly to building fraternity and defending justice in society. Dialogue between the followers of different religions does not take place simply for the sake of diplomacy, consideration, or tolerance. In the words of the bishops of India, the goal of dialogue is to establish friendship, peace, and harmony, and to share spiritual and moral values and experiences in a spirit of truth and love. That's very nice. The ultimate foundation. As believers, we are convinced that without an openness to the Father of all, there will be no solid and stable reasons for an appeal to fraternity. We are certain that only with this awareness that we are not orphans but children can we live in peace with one another. For reason by itself is capable of grasping the equality between men and of giving stability to their civic coexistence, but it cannot establish fraternity.
I mean, that makes it sound like we need to go out and make everybody believers.
That's a very, I'm conflicted by that statement. Big question mark next to that one.
Yeah, I think it's unreasonable to expect everyone to believe.
In this regard, I wish to cite the following memorable statement. If there is no transcendent truth, in obedience to which man achieves his full identity, then there is no sure principle for guaranteeing just relations between people. Their self-interest as a class, group, or nation would inevitably set them in opposition to one another. If one does not acknowledge transcendent truth, then the force of power takes over, and each person tends to make full use of the means at his disposal in order to impose his own interests or his own opinion with no regard for the rights of others. The root of modern totalitarianism is to be found in the denial of the transcendent dignity of the human person, who, as the visible image of the invisible God, is therefore by his very nature the subject of rights that no one may violate, no individual, group, class, nation, or state, not even the majority of the social body may violate these rights by going against the minority. Wow.
Which is what's going on now with the Asians.
Yeah, geez. Whew. That's heavy duty stuff. From our faith experience and from the wisdom accumulated over centuries, but also from lessons learned from our many weaknesses and failures, we, the believers of the different religions, know that our witness to God benefits our societies. The effort to see God with a sincere heart, provided it is never sullied by ideological or self-serving aims, helps us to recognize one another as traveling companions, truly brothers and sisters. We are convinced that when in the name of an ideology, there is an attempt to remove God from society, that society ends up adoring idols, and very soon men and women lose their way, their dignity is trampled, and their rights violated. You know how much suffering is caused by the denial of freedom of conscience and religious freedom, and how that wound leaves a humanity which is impoverished because it lacks hope and ideals to guide it. Wow. I like that. Excuse me. It should be acknowledged that among the most important causes of the crises of the modern world are a desensitized human conscience, a distancing from religious values, and the prevailing individualism accompanied by materialistic philosophies that deify the human person and introduce worldly and material values in place of supreme and transcendental principles. It is wrong when the only voices to be heard in public debate are those of the powerful and the experts. Room needs to be made for reflections born of religious traditions that are a repository of centuries of experience and wisdom. For religious classics can prove meaningful in every age. They have an enduring power to open new horizons, to stimulate thought, to expand the mind and the heart. Yet often they are viewed with disdain as a result of the myopia of a certain rationalism.
So I guess I'm wondering where he would come down on paganism.
Yeah, good.
It makes it sound like, if you're not in a monotheistic faith, you're never going to get there. But
Well, and there are some religious traditions that are used to stymie people and create a kind of oppression. So I think we need to be careful with that one.
For these reasons, the church, while respecting the autonomy of political life, does not restrict, does not restrict her mission to the private sphere. On the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world, or fail to reawaken the spiritual energy that can contribute to the betterment of society. It is true that religious ministers must not engage in the party politics that are the proper domain of the laity, but neither can they renounce the political dimension of life itself, which involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for integral human development. Interesting comment. The church has a public role over and above her charitable and educational activities. She works for the advancement of humanity and of universal fraternity. She does not claim to compete with earthly powers, but to offer herself as a family among families. This is the church, open to bearing witness in today's world, open to faith, hope, and love for the Lord, and for those whom he loves with a preferential love. A home with open doors. The church is a home with open doors because she is a mother. And in imitation of Mary, the mother of Jesus, we want to be a church that serves, that leaves home and goes forth from its places of worship, goes forth from its sacristies, in order to accompany life, to sustain hope, to be the sign of unity, to build bridges, to break down walls, to sow seeds of reconciliation. That is fabulous.
I have one question. Before the 269 reference there, open to faith, hope, and love for the Lord, and for those whom he loves with a preferential love. Is he setting apart people in that, or is he saying the human race?
Say the last part again, please.
In that sentence, is he setting apart certain people, or is he referring to the humanity, to people, human race? Those whom he loves with a preferential love that implies higher than or better than something else. What is he talking about?
You mean who are those with the preferential love?
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Throughout the scriptures, that would be the poor.
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
Open to faith, hope, and love for the Lord. And for those who, okay, I see what he's saying. All right.
Huh. Interesting. Christian identity. The church esteems the ways in which God works in other religions and rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for their manner of life and conduct, their precepts and doctrines, which often reflect a ray of that truth that enlightens all men and women. Yet we Christians are very much aware that if the music of the gospel ceases to resonate in our being, we will lose the joy born of compassion, the tender love born of trust, the capacity for reconciliation that has its source in our knowledge that we have been forgiven and sent forth. If the music of the gospel ceases to sound in our homes, in our public squares, our workplaces, our political and financial life, then we will no longer hear the strains that challenge us to defend the dignity of every man and woman. Others drink from other sources. For us, the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is the gospel of Jesus Christ. From it there arises for Christian thought and for the action of the church the primacy given to relationships, to the encounter with the sacred mystery of that other, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation for all. All to take root in every place, the church has been present for centuries throughout the world, for that is what it means to be Catholic. She can thus understand, from her own experience of grace and sin, the beauty of the invitation to universal love. Indeed, all things human are our concern. Wherever the councils of nations come together to establish the rights and duties of man, we are honored to be permitted to take our place among them. For many Christians, this journey of fraternity also has a mother whose name is Mary. Having received this universal motherhood at the foot of the cross, she cares not only for Jesus, but also for the rest of her children. In the power of the risen Lord, she wants to give birth to a new world where all of us are brothers and sisters, where there is room for all those whom our societies discard, where justice and peace are resplendent. We Christians ask that in those countries where we are a minority, we be guaranteed freedom, even as we ourselves promote that freedom for non-Christians in places where they are a minority. One fundamental human right must not be forgotten in the journey towards fraternity and peace. It is religious freedom for believers of all religions. That freedom proclaims that we can build harmony and understanding between different cultures and religions. It also testifies to the fact that since the important things we share are so many, it is possible to find a means of serene, ordered, and peaceful coexistence, accepting our differences and rejoicing that, as children of the one God, we are all brothers and sisters. At the same time, we ask God to strengthen unity within the church, a unity enriched by the differences, reconciled by the working of the Spirit. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, in which each member has his or her distinctive contribution to make. As St. Augustine said, the ear sees through the eye, aha, and the eye hears through the ear. It is also urgent to continue to bear witness to the journey of encounter between the different Christian confessions. We cannot forget Christ's desire that they may all be one. Hearing this call, we recognize with sorrow that the process of globalization still lacks the prophetic and spiritual contribution of unity among Christians. This notwithstanding, even as we make this journey towards full communion, we already have the duty to offer common witness to the love of God for all people by working together in the service of humanity. Someone else can read now for a while. Thank you.
So I take it when the Pope says full communion, he's talking about full conversation and not the sacrament.
You know, I wonder about that. I think this would be one of those areas where he might be in disagreement with the Curia, because the Franciscans are very open to communion being shared with anybody and everybody, the sacrament.
Oh.
They have a very sacramental view of life. They believe Christ is in, with, and under all of creation, and that anyone and everyone should come to the table. That clearly is not the position of the whole church. And the doctrine, or the Congregation for Doctrine, has made it clear that, you know, you have to be a good practicing Roman Catholic to receive the sacrament at the table. But that is not the Franciscan point of view. And I'm pretty sure Francis would just give the sacrament to any and all comers. That, you know, yeah, it's a really interesting position. I'm learning lots and lots of little sidebar details about what goes on internally in the Roman Church. I mean, you know, the Dominicans are over here saying one thing, and the Augustinians are over here saying another thing, and the Benedictines are over here saying something else, and the Franciscans are out here just going, we have an alternative orthodoxy.
I'd like to ask a question. It's bothered me for a while. What is the central point of the St. Augustines, of the Augustinians?
Well, remember, Luther was an Augustinian.
I understand that.
Um,
But you just quoted something about in, above, and under, and applied it to the Franciscans, and yet Luther is an Augustinian, so.
Yeah, which surprises me a little bit about Luther, that he came up with that description of the sacrament and actually understood that about nature. He would have made, in some respects, a decent Franciscan.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Well, and remember that, you know, when he broke with the church, he was breaking with his own Augustinian order in a lot of ways.
True.
The Augustinians were very doctrinally oriented. It was Augustine who came up with the doctrine of original sin.
Okay.
And Luther never escaped that idea. I confess that I am in bondage to sin and cannot free myself. Luther believed that the will was in bondage to sin. Franciscans wouldn't say that. Franciscans would acknowledge that sin exists, that it's in the world, that it taints everything we do, but that we're in bondage to it. No, we don't operate. We don't start with original sin. We start with original blessing. God created everything and said it is good. And the goal is to recover original blessing. That's where Christ takes us. Anyway, it's just a whole, they have 6 different starting points. And you know what, maybe I'll lead a class where I'll talk about what I've been learning from them, because it's a wonderful way to come at the faith from a very different direction than what we have conventionally learned and taught. But the Augustinians were pretty hardline doctrinally, and original sin was their primary starting point. That, you know, we're just all broken and Jesus provides the fix as long as we continue to stay, continue to
Follow the hard line.
well, yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Maybe we need a short class on what all these Indians believe and promote.
Yeah, it would be, well, they all have different focuses.
Yeah, both sides. I know, but that's one of my point, is that I'd like to know what some of those are.
Yeah, well, like the Dominicans, their focus is on preaching, proclamation of the gospel. Jesuits, their focus is on education.
Dominican preaching.
And evangelism. So anyway, yeah, it would be an interesting class also.
Wouldn't it, a few weeks, that would be good.
Okay.
All right, I need somebody else to read. My voice is cracking a little bit here.
I can't read. I got the wrong glasses today.
Well,
we're at religion and violence.
I can read.
yes.
Religion and violence. A journey of peace is possible between religions. Its point of departure must be God's way of seeing things. God does not see with his eyes, God sees with his heart. And God's love is the same for everyone, regardless of religion. Even if they are atheists, his love is the same. When the last day comes and there is sufficient light to see things as they really are, we are going to find ourselves quite surprised.
Amen.
It follows that we believers need to find occasions to speak with one another and to act together for the common good and the promotion of the poor.
We do that.
This has nothing to do with watering down or concealing our deepest convictions when we encounter others who think differently than ourselves. For the deeper, stronger, and richer our own identity is, the more we will be capable of enriching others with our own proper contribution. We believers are challenged to return to our sources in order to concentrate on what is essential, worship of God and love for our neighbor, lest some of our teachings, taken out of context, end up feeding forms of contempt, hatred, xenophobia, or negation of others. The truth is that violence has no basis in our fundamental religious convictions, but only in their distortion. Sincere and humble worship of God bears fruit not in discrimination, hatred, and violence, but in respect for the sacredness of life, respect for the dignity and freedom of others, and loving commitment to the welfare of all. Truly, whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. For this reason, terrorism is deplorable and threatens the society of people, be they in the East or the West, the North or the South, and disseminates panic, terror, and pessimism, But this is not due to religion, even when terrorists instrumentalize it. It is due, rather, to an accumulation of incorrect interpretations of religious texts and to policies linked to hunger, poverty, injustice, oppression, and pride. That is why it is so necessary to stop supporting terrorist movements fueled by financing, the provisions of weapons and strategy, and by attempts to justify these movements, even using the media. All these must be regarded as international crimes that threaten security and world peace. Such terrorism must be condemned in all its forms and expressions. Religious convictions about the sacred meaning of human life permit us to recognize the fundamental values of our common humanity, values in the name of which we can and must cooperate, build and dialogue, pardon and grow. This will allow different voices to unite in creating a melody of sublime nobility and beauty instead of fanatical cries of hatred. At times, fundamentalist violence is unleashed in some groups of whatever religion by the rashness of their leaders. Yet the commandment of peace is inscribed in the depths of religious traditions that we represent. As religious leaders, we are called to be true people of dialogue, to cooperate in building peace, not as intermediaries, but as authentic mediators. Intermediaries seek to give everyone a discount, ultimately in order to gain something for themselves. The mediator, on the other hand, is one who retains nothing for himself, but rather spends himself generously until he is consumed, knowing that only the gain is peace. Each one of us is called to be an artisan of peace by uniting and not dividing, by extinguishing hatred and not holding on to it, by opening paths of dialogue and not by constructing new walls.
I have a question. So in the paragraph or the section that Bob just read, talks about fundamentalists. And so I'm thinking about Pope Francis's trip to Iraq, right? It was Iraq, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't heard anything on the news or any follow-up commentary regarding that trip, and especially regarding his meeting with that one particular Ayatollah. Whether there was any commitment made, or whether there was any discussion of common goals for their religions, working in unison to avoid fundamentalists and terrorism. I haven't heard any follow-up at all about that.
You're right.
Anybody help?
I don't think there has been much publicity about that.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either. So maybe nothing significant was accomplished, which would be sad.
Do you think Pope Francis went to Iraq in the same way that St. Francis went to the Middle East during the Crusades?
I think that was a model for him, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, he also went to Egypt earlier, and that was a very, very productive trip for him. So I think he had hopes, and I think he'll continue going where he thinks he can maybe initiate some dialogue and come to some understanding.
Okay, I hope so.
We'll find out in our next document by the Pope. It's coming out.
Oh, the one he's writing now?
Yeah, it's one he's writing now. Volume 2.
The next paragraph refers to the Grand Imam, somebody. I don't know where he's from. Maybe that answers your question, Phil.
Egypt.
Oh, this is Egypt?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And
And we have 3 more paragraphs in the document.
Well, I thought, well, we've got some prayers and some other things in the
Yeah.
document.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of have a discussion about overall what we learned from it, and if we have, what our other takeaways are. So that'll be
Okay.
for next week.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, my friends. Any other last comments before we duck out today?